Welcome to the first video of possibly many for JavaScript guides for people that are new to JavaScript, new to programming, any of that kind of stuff. This is for you. So the kind of scope of this series will be to cover basically everything that I've learned from starting JavaScript up until this point and kind of relaying it in a way that I find is easy to understand and not so intimidating like you see in some guides online. So we're not going to cover installing Node.js and all that fun stuff for getting VS Code set up in this guide. This is purely for JavaScript itself. So if you need to look somewhere else to get VS Code set up or get JavaScript installed on your computer or Node.js installed on your computer, now is the time to do that. So starting out, we can see we are in VS Code. We don't currently have a file open. So anytime you want to work with JavaScript code, you want to create a file that has a .js extension. So you can either go up here, click File, and click New File, or you can use Command N or Control N to make a new file on Windows. You can see over here we have untitled-1. So we'll just do Command S to save it, and we're going to name this file lesson1.js. So here you can see we have created a JavaScript file that's represented by the .js file extension. And the first thing we're going to do, just to make sure kind of everything is set up on our computer, is do something you might have seen before called hello world. So we're going to use the command or the function called console.log, which will just print out a message to our console down below if everything is all set up properly and working. So if I do node, which is our runtime environment, lesson1.js, you should see this message print out when you run your file. If you don't see that, you have some underlying issues or something's not set up properly. So you fix that before continuing with this guide. So I'm going to turn off and tell us or Copilot for right now because it's kind of being annoying. Really? Okay, so here we have our first file. So we are going to start by kind of elaborating on our console log to print out things to our console, to kind of talk about what we can actually achieve with this. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of talk about the dreaded, I guess math would be a good way to start. It's a kind of a, I guess, what do you call that? Idea that people have that programming in itself is very math intensive, and that's really not the case whatsoever. Although there is the use of like algorithms to make code more efficient and run faster, that's pretty far down the line from where you are right now if you're watching this video. You can get pretty far in your JavaScript and software career without having to do much math at all. So don't really worry too much about that. But we're just going to start off with something simple. We're going to use our console.log, and we're going to pretend that we have a calculator inside of these parentheses right here. So all I want to do is just do 2 plus 2, and that's all I want to console log. It's just console log 2 plus 2. Before I run the file, I want to make sure I save it. You can tell a file is unsaved by this little circle right here when I have in the file tab. So if you see that circle, your file is not saved. But if I hit Command S to save, you can see that circle's gone, which means my file is currently saved. So if I just run this file again, you can see that I'm getting 4 printed out in my terminal down below. And I get rid of that on the side. Just a very, very brief thing, right? We have 4. You can do this with other variables as well, or other numbers as well. You could do like 10 divided by 2, which is represented by the slash. And we'll just get rid of this line. Right, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So your console log is your go-to kind of tool for printing out things that you're trying to test. In the future, we're going to use it for printing out more complex variables, objects, and functions. But this console.log thing is going to be used throughout this entire guide for visualizing what we're working with. So that's a good thing to kind of have in your arsenal and remember. So first, let's talk about variables. So if you've done kind of anything up to, I guess, 10th grade math, you know what variables are. But if not, we'll just kind of cover it. So a variable is just when you use a symbol or a letter or a word to represent something else. A good example of this is if I was to say x equals 2. Anytime I want to see to use the value of x, I could refer to it itself. So if we go back to our, I'm just going to put this here for now. Don't worry about this, we'll cover it. But if I say console.log x now, I run this, you can see I print out 2. So you can use variables to kind of assign different equations to simpler, I guess, values to work with. What I mean by this is I could also do x equals 2 plus 2. Right? Now I'm starting to get like a formula here, right? X is equal to whatever 2 plus 2 is. And kind of expanding on that, you can also use variables with each other. If I said let y equals 4, and then I said x equals 2 plus y, what do you think we would get printed out down below, right? We have y is equal to 4. So whenever we use y, we're looking at the value of 4, and then we have the value of 2 right here. So what we're trying to print out is x is equal to 2 plus 6. So when we console.log x down below, we will get the value of, oh sorry, not 2 plus 6, 2 plus 4, sorry. 2 plus 4 equals 6. So when I kind of skipped over it briefly before, there's a good reason for it, but let's talk about what this let word right here is. In JavaScript, there is 3 ways to declare variables. So if you want to make a new variable, let's call it a. If you said a is equal to 5, this isn't the proper way to create a variable. You need one of our variable declarators here, which are either const, let, or var. So they each have their own specific purposes, and it's kind of important to know when to use what one. But if you are worried about forgetting what to use what one, the safest bet to do when starting out is just use let for everything. That's not a good practice, but it'll make your code work, and you can improve on that later on. However, we're going to still go over those. So the declarator of const is used whenever you want to make a constant that's the same throughout your code. A good example of that would be like google.com is a constant. So let's say Google URL. So I make a variable called Google URL, and it's equal to google.com. So the Google URL is never going to change, right? I know that anytime I reference Google URL, I'm going to get google.com. So this is a good time to use a constant because I don't have to worry about it changing, and I know I'm not accidentally going to override it. However, let's say you do want to override a variable. That's when we use the value of let. So just like before, when I said let y equal 4, we'll get rid of these really quick. So let's say let y equal hello, okay? Actually, for the sake of this, let's say let y equal 5, okay? If y is equal to 5, then anywhere I use y, right, the number of 5 will get put in. But the value of y might change. Let's pretend that instead of y, we have a variable called let customer's age or something like that. Customer's age, okay? So that our customer's age is 25. The value of a customer's age might change, right? So in the event that they change, we want to be able to update this variable without having it stuck to 25 forever in the sake of the run cycle of our code. So when we use the variable, the declarator of let, we can simply update a variable at any time by just redefining it with a single equal sign. So we defined customer's age as 25, and right below it, we defined it as 26. So if we want to visualize this, right, we can do a console.log of customer's age of 25. And then down below it, we have a customer's age of 26 where we have redefined that value. So when I run this code down below after saving it, you can see I print out 25 and then I print out 26 because I overrided that value. So when we talk about the overriding of variables, this is where the benefit of using a const comes in. So you can see here, if I do a const.log of Google URL, right? By the way, these double slashes represent comments. We'll cover that later. Don't worry about it too much. It's just more so for you guys to visualize stuff. If I was to console log out Google URL, what would you expect to print out in the terminal down below? I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. And if you thought that it should print out google.com, you are correct, because you can see at the line above, we define Google URL as google.com. However, if on the next line I say Google URL equals yahoo.ca, and then I try to print out the value of Google URL again, what do we think the variable should be? So if you answered yahoo.ca, you wouldn't technically be wrong, but there isn't really a correct answer to this question. The actual thing that would happen is that our function or our code essentially would error. So we can visualize that actually. If I type node lesson1.js, we can see that we have an assignment to a constant variable, and it tells us the line 5. So we look at line 5, and we can see we're trying to set a constant variable named Google URL equal to yahoo.ca. And that's not allowed because, as I mentioned before, you cannot override a constant variable with a new variable. Once you set it, it's set like that for the entire time the code is running. So not able to do this. And I'll just put a multi-line comment here that that way you guys can see that we're not able to do that. And now, as I mentioned, there's 3 variables in total. The last one's var. So if you see var anywhere, just know that either the demo you're looking at or the code you're looking at is probably very outdated. Var should, this is biased obviously, but var should never be used in modern day JavaScript. It provides little functionality that we need because we have let and const to do everything that we need. var also comes up with very weird errors that you can get sometimes, and it's very confusing to kind of manage. It should just be avoided at all costs, honestly. So if you ever see var in a demo, just know that it's very old code, or the person is a boomer and doesn't want to adjust their way of working. It's probably the only 2 reasons you'd ever see var. So we know that let and const are our 2 variables that we want to use. So we're going to finish off this lesson with some more kind of variable usage. So you can see in both these examples I used longer variable names, and that's a very good practice. So we're going to kind of talk briefly about naming scheme to kind of save yourself a hassle in the future. Imagine you have a file that's 300 lines long, okay? And I name my variables x, y, and a, okay? And a is equal to like a sentence that says the dog jumps over the fence. X is equal to 3, and a is equal to 9 plus 9, okay? So let's say 300 lines down from now, if you're trying to use your variables, these are going to be very hard to remember what these individual letters do, especially once you start getting hundreds of variables in your code, if that happens. A much better way to do it would be to actually kind of describe the purpose of these variables. Even though it takes more time to write out when you first create them, you'll save yourself a huge hassle in the future. So instead of X, how about we name this something, for example, like dog jump sentence. And so we know that, okay, dog jump sentence is equal to this this message right here. Y, I mean, 3 is just a number, but we could say like number of dogs, and A, 9 plus 9. This isn't right, obviously, but we'll just say dog years math or something like that. Just so we have examples of these are, if we look it down in the future, we know exactly what these variables reference and why they're called the way they're called. Just one last thing we're going to finish off with before we kind of wrap up this lesson on getting started with variable declarators. We're going to talk about something you may have never heard of before called camel case. So camel case is the kind of naming scheme that we use in JavaScript to define variables. So for example, let's say we want to make a new variable, and let's look at this dog jump sentence, for example. Here I already used camel case, but let's talk about if we didn't use camel case. So what camel case refers to is every time a new word starts, you capitalize the first letter. However, the very first letter of the entire word is not capitalized. So you can see dog is not capitalized, jump is capitalized, and sentence is capitalized. The reason we do this is because, well, number one, you cannot make a variable cannot have spaces in it. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if you just put it like this, then it's kind of hard to see where words start and end if you don't already know what you're looking at. There's also other ways to name variables. For example, you could do, I think this is called snake case, or you do underscores between each character. You can also do like capital case, which is just every single word is a capital. But for the sake of this lesson, you're going to see me always using camel case. So it's always the first letter is not a capital, and then every other start of the word is a capital. So that's pretty much going to wrap up our first lesson. Just to kind of recap over stuff we've gone over, we talked about the difference between const and let and when to use them. We talked about how to use console logs and why we use console logs. And then we talked about some simple math as well as how we can properly name our variables to make our lives easier in the future, along with what camel case exactly is. Next lesson, I think we're going to kind of start expanding a bit more on using our variables and kind of the different tricks we can start to do to make our code easy to understand while still being beneficial for us to work with. So yeah, hopefully we see you guys in the next lesson.